Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are going to be talking about using the WebDriver IO to build automation scripts using JavaScript. Now, this is not really going to be a slide-driven presentation today. We are going to primarily go through the website, talk about the different technologies and things you can do with WebDriver, and then we're going to jump into a full hands-on example building your first project and looking at some of the different ways you can use WebDriver for testing. Let me jump out of here. So you can find WebDriver IO in the name itself. It is actually in WebDriver IO is the website. So you can go to WebDriver IO. And it basically is a next-gen browser and mobile automation test framework for Node.js. Now, in the past, I've talked about code test frameworks. I've talked about the different ways you can build your test, how you should test. And we've talked about different things like unit testing, PHP testing, JUnit. Every language essentially has its own way of testing. And JavaScript's no different. However, what the difference here is a lot of your JavaScript tools that are out there for testing are built on top of or around existing frameworks that were built for other languages like C and Java. WebDriver IO is no exception. So the WebDriver IO is actually built on top of the Selenium WebDriver. So if you are a Java house or a C house and you have a lot of back-end developers and you have a lot of core developers, my recommendation for you is to go look at the Selenium discussions I've talked about. However, if you are a JavaScript only or front-end only shop where you're only dealing with JavaScript, HTML, CSS, things of that nature, you're going to probably want something a little more lightweight, a little more friendly for your development environment. And for that, I would recommend looking at this WebDriver IO. WebDriver IO is real easy to get started. You just click the Get Started button here, and it walks you through setting up your project. And we'll get at this in just a second. But let's first talk about what is WebDriver IO. So WebDriver IO is a true cross-browser testing JavaScript library that you can use. It is, again, wrapped around the Selenium WebDriver. So you can actually use it to test all the different browsers like Selenium. It follows basic web standards. So again, it follows that WebDriver protocol. You can use Puppeteer. You can use different front-end tools. You can also, interestingly enough, with WebDriver IO, you can actually go in and interact with the Chrome DevTools protocol. This actually comes from the Node.js libraries. So this was kind of neat that I liked with this. The other thing is it's a modern web application, so it's written in React, Vue, Angular, Sleeve, and other frameworks. So it works with those. It also works for running and emulating on real devices. So you want to test mobile devices, you can use WebDriver IO. You can also use Appium. But the other nice thing about this WebDriver IO that I like is that it can integrate with multiple different test frameworks. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. But the thing is, WebDriver IO is essentially a tool that you can use for JavaScript testing. So if you use Node.js or our front end, I recommend looking at WebDriver IO. So to get started, you essentially just need to do a few things. One, you need to have Node.js installed. So the first thing you need to do is come out here to Node.js and just make sure that you download the current or the latest LTS version for your operating system. And then once you have it installed, you can test it by typing Node. Now, I've already done this step, so I'm not going to do this again. But if you need to walk through installing Node again, you can go back out to my React Native presentations where I actually walk through using Node.js for React Native. All right, so we need Node. So we start with Node. And then the other thing to do is you just need to run npm init WDIO for WebDriver IO, and dot. This will install a default project, or it will install WebDriver IO into an existing project. Or if you want to create a new project, you just do npm init and the path to your project. So let's just do this real quick. So if I come out here to terminal, make this a little bit bigger, and let me go to my development environment, WebDriver IO environment. And the first thing I want to do is I want to just build or make my own project folder. So we'll do make directory, and we'll do example 2. All right, so we'll go into our example 2 folder, and then we will take that command that they listed here, npm space init space wdio space dot. So this will set up WebDriver IO in the current folder, and hit enter. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to kick off the WebDriver IO. It's going to download all the package dependencies. And this takes about a minute or so. There we go. So now it's running the wizard, and it's going to ask you a bunch of questions. All right, so the first thing you have is you have a couple options. So what's interesting, again, is that WebDriver IO is built to work with multiple different frameworks and multiple different tools. So you can run WebDriver IO locally. You can interact or interface it with Xperi Test, Sauce Labs, or Browser Stack testing bots, or Lambda tests, or some different service. Or if you have your own Selenium Cloud, you can choose that. So we can go through these. I will say on my local machine. And then it also gives you the option of building based on 3 essentially JavaScript friendly test frameworks: Mocha, Jasmine, and Cucumber. I'll take Mocha by default, but we're going to look at some different examples of the projects that they have in a minute. So for now, we'll just take Mocha. All right, do you want to use a compiler, Babel, TypeScript, or no? So Babel is really good. It gives you kind of that type ahead features that you can get with Visual Code. But I'm going to go ahead and just use TypeScript because this gives us a little bit more type ahead in Visual Studio. Okay, and where our test located, we're just going to use the default ./test/specs, yada, yada, yada. And do you want WebDriver IO to auto-generate some test files? And this is the beauty of WebDriver IO. You can get up and running with a very simple test project immediately. So we'll say yes. And then do you want to use page objects? Of course we do. We love page objects. Page objects make our lives easier when dealing with web pages. Now, you don't have to use page objects. You can say no. However, in this case, I want to use page objects. Now, wherever our page object is going to be located, we're going to follow their default example here. Now, the last question is, which reporter do we want to use? So by default, WebDriver gives you a whole slew of options for creating reports. So I'm just going to stick with my typical JUnit report and unselect spec. And you can go through and you can actually select all of these. So you could do JSON, Cucumber. Now, I don't recommend doing all of these, only do the ones that you really need. But just if you want to play around, you can. And then once you're done, you hit enter. Now, do you want to add a plugin for your test setup? And basically, do we want a wait for or an Angular component harness? We really don't want either, so we'll just hit enter for now. And then it's going to ask you which service do you want your test set up for? And then we can select, okay, do we want to test for Chrome? Do we want to test for Firefox, Edge, Sauce Labs? One moment here. So I want Chrome driver to start with, and we'll take Visual Code. You can do Appium, Browser Stack, Firefox Profile, cross-browser testing, Lambdas, Docker. So you have all these different integration points, which from a JavaScript perspective, this is awesome. It really simplifies things for you. Now, with this being said, again, this is really, I recommend this if you are more a front-end shop. If you are a back-end shop, I highly recommend maybe looking directly at using the Selenium WebDriver with whatever unit testing software you use, like TestNG, JUnit, PHP unit, and so on. All right, so we'll take Chrome driver. And where's our base URL? We'll just do localhost. Do you want to run npm install? Sure. And now we're installing all of our packages. And almost done. Perfect. So now we're done. So now it's installed your entire project and it set everything up for you and it will actually run. So it tells you how to run it. So we do npm run WDIO. And it will take a minute to kick off because it has to set everything up the first time. It opens up the browser and it logged in the Heroku and it logged off and we're done. So that's how quickly it is to just get up and running really quickly. Now, we'll look at some more of this in just a moment. So that is the quick and dirty. That is getting started. There are some other little pieces you can do here. So if you have never used WebDriver IO or Selenium or any web-based testing tool, they give you a whole lot of examples here to work with. So if you want to jump in and look at what they've already provided as boilerplates, they have a whole slew of projects out here that you can go through and take a look at. So if you have Appium, there's an Appium boilerplate you can check out. Cucumber, Jasmine, WebIO with Mocha, Cucumber BDD, Jasmine BDD. So there are a ton of projects out here to get you started quickly. So you don't have to go figure out your project structure. You don't have to figure out your dependencies for this. It's all there. So that is, in a nutshell, how to get started and jump right in. Now, the next thing we're going to look at are some of the concepts. So we can, there are a couple different settings you can do. We can set it up for WebDriver directly, or we can set it up to use the Chrome DevTools. There's some package APIs in here, which if you're familiar with WebDriver, it's the same, essentially the same options. It's just a wrapper. So you have options, modifier, prototyping, standalone mode, multi-threaded mode, things of that nature. One thing that's new is since 2021, they have disabled the sync mode or have at least sunsetted it because asynchronous is primarily the way to go in the Angular world. So with asynchronous mode, you have to use the awaits. And this has become standard practice in Selenium as well. So this is nothing new. If you've used Selenium before, this will look very similar to you as well. Synchronous mode basically means you have to run the entire test from beginning to end. There is no wait. It's going to come in here. You have to do pauses. So this is the old ugly stuff that we had to do back when I was showing you the test framework, where we had to do the thread pause to wait for some of those AJAX calls. Well, then a group came out and decided, hey, why don't we make life easier? Instead of doing pause, or which is thread unsafe, let's do something that's a little more thread safe. And that is using this await. And if you use Java, there is an await class that you can include in your projects as well through Maven. And I believe C also has this as well. Automation protocols, well, of course, it's the WebDriver protocol. You have to install the drivers that you need. So you have Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Edge, Internet Explorer, and Safari. The only thing I don't like about this is you have to install the drivers through the tool. Now, that's great. You can reinstall them as needed as they get updated. The only kicker I have with this, where I kind of like the Selenium version, the Java-based version better, is that there is the WebDriver Manager project in Git that allows you to check out in Maven. You go through the WebDriver Manager, and it will let you choose the versions that you want, or it will always pull down the latest version of the browser WebDriver at runtime. So you're always running the latest and greatest. Here, you have to actually make sure that you have the latest driver for your particular testing. So if Chrome comes out with a new version, you might need to reinstall or pull the latest Chrome driver. Auto waiting, this is a neat little feature. So implicit versus explicit waits kind of gets ruled out here. You can set timeouts, wait for exists, find elements, which is actually funny. If you go back to my framework, test framework that I built, this is essentially what I built into my framework, the implicit versus explicit. So it basically gives you the ability to set the timeout or wait for exists for particular elements. So you can set the timeout for the load time for the page, which is implicit, and the explicit waits are waiting for specific elements. So the way they do it, they just built it all into one. So wait for timeout, which is essentially the same kind of method that I built into my test framework. So really, wait for timeout, you just write a wrapper class around the waits in WebDriver, and it's real easy. However, you could also use the await with the asynchronous wait, and you could set up your properties this way. So just another simple way of handling awaiting. Some different configurations. You have your driver binaries you can install and configure. If you have to go through a proxy, they do support that. TypeScript setup. So now you can, for autocomplete. So remember I included this. This will help us for Visual Studios. This just gives you the type ahead feature. So as you're typing, you can quickly hit enter and fill in the gap. So you don't have to sit there and wait or have typos. Babel setup. A Babel is just simple. It gives you the nice coloring presets. So you can use Babel, you can use TypeScript, you have options. WebDriver options, this is the exact, options are essentially the same as the Selenium WebDriver options. So you have all the different things that you can set over here, agents, headers, WebDriver IO, test runner specs, hooks, your before, after, all the things that you have in Selenium WebDriver, you have here in WebDriver. They're essentially wrappers around the actual Selenium WebDriver application, or I guess the runner. Different guides. So if you're not familiar with Selenium, you've never used Selenium, this is just kind of a quick guide on how to look things up. So you do await. And what's interesting here is if you're very familiar with using the Chrome dev tools.